All right, fantastic. All right, let's get started. So we're going to start the International Bat Night with a bit of art instead of a bit of science. Sorry about that. So this is going to be my presentation on in-flight bat photography. It's a pretty niche form of photography that I've got into, and I'm just going to run through a few of my photos. So tonight on the menu, or maybe this afternoon or this morning, depending where you are in the world, I'm just going to go for a bit of an introduction, who I am, what do I do, and then we'll dissect for the photos and the events that lead up to it. So the first cave, which is one of the first bat photos I've got in flight. Then we'll go through a man, a backyard, and some bats. And then Kings Plains, which is this fantastic conservation property up in far north Queensland. And then my favorite culvert, which is basically me hanging out underneath a bridge for about a week. So a bit about myself. My name is Janico Kelk. I'm an ecologist. I worked for WSP, it's one of the largest engineering firms in the world. Our Australian team has about 40 to 50 ecologists. I work in Brisbane in Queensland, which is sort of like nestled right in the middle of the East Coast. We work on all sorts of different projects, from renewable energy, roads, mining, energy extraction of all sorts, linear infrastructure of all sorts. And basically my job is to go out, do wildlife surveys, write about them, and minimize the impacts of said developments. I'm also an award-winning wildlife photographer, and it sort of matches up with my professional life a fair bit. I've been very lucky to have some of my images thrown in, have either won or finalized in a number of wildlife competitions. You can find my images in zoos, museums, images around the world. No, you're right. And you can see them on magazines and journals and a couple of different books. I primarily specialize in reptile and frog photography. I've sort of spent my early 20s running around the globe looking for frogs and reptiles, and the idea of traveling seems pretty bizarre currently, so it's nice to just reminisce about it. And in the last few years, I've become really interested in mammal ecology and just mammal photography in general. And I'm obviously interested in bat photography, which is why I'm here, but also just like small carnivores. And some of the best ways to take images of those is using remote camera photography, which basically just match up a motion sensor to a nice fancy camera, and you use your knowledge of the species, whether that's just like where they go past, where they live, and set up a camera there to get some nice intimate shots of them. So let's go through and dissect some images. The first cave. So this started around 2017. I was a lowly undergraduate. I did most of my ecology degree online, but me and my mate did it together, and there was always 2 to 4 weeks each year where you'd have like intensive classes, and so we'd go to university for 2 to 4 weeks and just do like field work and pracs basically. And our university was kind of cool. It was nestled in the Great Dividing Range, and there was just this beautiful rainforest to the north and to the west, and then below it was this awesome sand bluff. And instead of studying like a normal student, me and my friends decided just to go spotlighting each night. And so on one of the nights we went down to that sandstone bluff, and there's a few endemic lizards there that were really cool. So that's the one you can see in the bottom left. That's Saltarius KDA. It only lives in that sandstone bluff. So we were searching for that, and we just came across this cave, and it was just full of bats. And it was the first time I've actually ever seen anything like that. Whilst I've interacted with bats previous to that for work, I've never seen it in this natural landscape with just that many individuals in one space. You can actually see a few bubs there. So fast forward another 6 months, and I came back with all my bat photography gear. So the first time I set it up, there was no bubs this time around, which is sort of what I planned for, trying to keep my impact as low as possible. And I was only here for one night. So this is the cave, and this is the setup that I had. And this is just a small video of what's involved to take these images gear-wise. So that's basically the gear that's involved. I hope the volume of that video came through, but that basically just explains pretty much all the gear. I'm not going to get too much into the gear because this is not really the platform for it. But if you've got any questions about it, feel free to send me a message and I'll happily chat about it. So this is the outcome. This is like the first time I've ever tried this technique, and I got these very nice photos of eastern cave bats leaving the cave entrance. Yeah, they're Vesperdalis troutoni, and they're sort of quite common all on the eastern coast of Australia, especially in the Great Dividing Range. And they don't generally need caves, like you'll see them in culverts and just rocky overhangs. And they're somewhat common, but they're still just a really interesting bat because, especially for us Australians, because there's not really that many cave bats that live in Australia. So the next few images, I can't really say exactly where this cave is because it's on a guy's private property, and yeah, he obviously doesn't want to know. And so all I'll say is I was in a pub and a bloke who was selling a dog told me where a cave was. So basically, me and my partner drove 20 hours north of our house to find this cave, and we came across it. And there was a bloke who I was trying to get to, a guy I was trying to get his attention, but he was making a boat out of all things. He had an orbital sander going. So I was sort of sitting out behind him looking like an idiot, trying to I was just jumping around like, hey, g'day, can I please get your attention? Please just look at me. And he just had no idea I was there. And eventually after 10 minutes, he finally saw me and looked up. And he had a bit of a chat to me. And once he worked out that we weren't there to, just camp, have a party and light a fire and have a good time, but we were there to take photos of wildlife. And this is some of the critters that you could find on this property. That's a chameleon gecko in the top right, green ringtail possum. These are all animals that you can find in the wet tropics. But what we were there for was a particular cave, as I mentioned. And this is the cave that we went to. So Jasmine's my lovely fiance, and you can sort of see in that blurry image of the video there, the cave entrance. And so we set up, and this was the outcome of that. And it's pretty nice. I like it. It's the bats doing all the work there. It looks amazing because it's spread eagle and it's got this beautiful orange fur. So that's the dusky leaf-nosed bat. I was quite happy with this image. It's won a few different competitions or finalized in a few different competitions. And yeah, I'm quite proud of that. And it was just one of those things where, we just went off on a bit of a tangent and everything just fell into place, which very rarely happens for me. But yeah, so over the next few years, I started teaming up with conservation NGOs all around Australia. And one of the first ones was the South Endeavour Trust. So the South Endeavour Trust, basically what they do is they buy up large plots of land of high biodiversity value, and that might be in the form of threatened ecological communities, just unique landscapes, or just a high amount of threatened species. And so Kings Plains is the name of the property that we went to. It had a few things going for it. It had these really unique limestone casts, which are quite uncommon in Australia. If you haven't been, Australia isn't really known for its caves, hence we're not really known for our cave bats. It's not like Southeast Asia or South America where there's caves dime a dozen. Our landscape's pretty old and ancient, and a lot of caves are just eroded away over many millennia, I guess. So that's my partner. You can see just looking into the mouth of this limestone cave. And the other thing that's really interesting about this place is just full of threatened species. So there's heaps of northern quolls, which are like a small, like medium-sized dasyurid, which is a mammalian carnivore, and it's got heaps of threatened species of bats. And yep, that's one of those unique limestone casts that I mentioned before. And the threatened species of bat that we really wanted to see was the ghost bat. So the ghost bat, for those who don't know, is a large carnivorous bat. It's Australia's only truly carnivorous bats. It feeds on a number of vertebrates, including frogs, rodents, other bats, and birds, which I think is very cool. And Tim, the manager of South Endeavour Trust, he gave us a few restrictions to see the ghost bats, which I completely agree with. I'm not complaining whatsoever. But he basically said, I'm only going to give you 2 hours, and only one night to be at the ghost bat cave, sorry, because they're quite sensitive and I really don't just want to disrupt them for the sake of a photo. And I entirely agreed with that. So my partner and I spent 2 nights at a different set of caves that had no ghost bats in it, just setting up and learning to set up our gear in complete silence and do it really quick without making basically any noise. And over 2 nights, we became a well-oiled machine and we were able to do that. So that's my partner inside a cave. And this is the outcome of those few nights. It's an eastern horseshoe bat. Again, they're quite common throughout Australia. You see them in train tunnels and just all around generally. And so, yeah, after those 2 nights, we finally got everything working smoothly, understood exactly how to set this up. It's quite intense gear-wise. Like, I think the way we set it up, there's 5 flashes. That means there's 7 tripods because you've got one for the camera, and then you've got the camera itself, and then you've got the motion sensor. And then we had 2 cameras, so that's 8 tripods. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, and trying to get everything to line up perfectly is quite difficult. And so, yeah, that's the setup that we had at the Ghost Bat Cave. We got there in the late afternoon, set up in complete silence. I think it took us about 20 minutes or so. Once we were happy, we jumped up to the top of the cave and just watched the sunset. And I should say that the entire time we were with the land managers of the South Endeavour Trust, just so they could keep an eye on us. So Kings Plains is this beautiful landscape where you've got remnant old growth ironbark trees, just ironbark trees and savanna covering these rolling hills. And every now and again, you get these limes and stone casts just popping out. And yeah, it's pretty stunning. You don't really see much of that in far north Queensland. But yeah, this is the outcome after 3 days of work. It's a ghost bat emerging from that cave. And it was actually one of the coolest wildlife moments I've ever had, just generally in my short life on Earth, I guess. But it was really cool because, like I said, we were confined to 2 hours of photography there. So the first hour, nothing really happened, and there was just little micro bats flicking in and out of the cave. And as you guys know, they're just sort of warming up before they do their full emergence. And our gear wasn't set up to take photos of smaller stuff. Like these ghost bats are actually, they got like a 60 centimeter wingspan. So yeah, we're sort of aiming for a larger animal. And I was getting quite upset internally because there was no ghost bats had shown. I was like, man, did we just drive like 3 days to get here and have like complete failure? And then all of a sudden, after about an hour and a half, I heard this really deep rhythmic bass just on repeat, basically. And it sort of sounded to me like an elephant stamping in the background, like just walking through the forest. And I was very confused. I was just sort of laying flat against the rocks, wondering what was going on. And all of a sudden, this giant ghost bat came smashing out of the cave like a bat out of hell, out of all things. And for like a very split second, you could see all the flashes light up. And there was this amazing bat just frozen in space, and like on the camera as well, most importantly. And what that rhythmic bass noise was its wings beating inside the cave. Like you could actually hear it from the outside. It was just amazing. And that happened another 5 times that night. And it was just one of the coolest like things I've ever experienced, where you hear this giant animal flapping inside the cave and all of a sudden it would shoot out. And one of them like got so close to my face, I could feel the wind off its wings just like on my face. It was fantastic. So I'm going to go through my last photo. It's my favorite culvert. Basically, it's a small story of how I spent a week hanging out underneath a small bridge like a troll. Not far from my old house, there was a culvert that was full of large-footed myotis. For those who don't know, the large-footed myotis is Australia's only fishing bat. Basically, it's got these large, long feet, long toes, sorry, that uses to trawl through water to pick up small aquatic invertebrates and fish to eat. And they're quite common underneath culverts. So this is the setup. I spent like the first 3 days just working out how these bats behave. And basically what they would do is, just on emergence, they would just do loops around those 2 culverts. And they would do that for about half an hour, and then they would fly off, go feed and forage and do whatever they did for about an hour, come back, do some more loopies. And they would just do this whole process on repeat. And once I worked out exactly how they banked around corners and where they would pass, I set up my cameras. And this is explaining the process a bit further.
Yeah, Janico, I don't think the sound is coming through.
Oh, yeah, no worries. So that's a 7D Mark II, and then it's basically on a intervalometer. So the camera just shoots over and over and over again. There's a motion sensor connected to the camera, and basically when the bat goes past the camera, it will light up the camera and all the flashes simultaneously. And what I've done is I've set up the camera so the shutter speed is going on 5-second exposures, and then the flashes, what they do is they go off 3 times per exposure. So that means you get, you know, 3 exposures in one photo essentially. And what that does is it gives you like this strobe effect. And so after dozens of near misses, like 5 nights sitting in front of a stagnant water and 1,000 mosquito bites, I've just got heaps of images that didn't work. But so they're all one image put together and one bat flying together. And the outcome was this. So this is like one of my favorite photos where everything just sort of worked. And what that is it's the front 3 bats, I guess, is how to explain it, is the bat flying through space and the flashes going off 1, 2, and 3. But that very last bat in the background is actually another bat in high-speed pursuit. So it's 2 bats having a bit of a play around these culverts. And yeah, it was just a week worth of work, not far from my house, trying to work out this behavior and getting like a pretty unique photo. And I kind of like it because it's sort of combined my knowledge of ecology and art together, and it was just a really fun time for me. So thanks to Nils, for hosting this event. It's really cool, such a great idea. If you guys have any questions, feel free to message me on Instagram or my email, and hit me up. Thanks for that.
Thank you. Yeah, you've got some fantastic photos. I knew it was a good idea to invite you.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, but yeah, what you said about the ghost bat, like it really reminded me of when I saw my ghost bat during my big bat year. It was weird as well. I could sort of hear that something was around, but I wasn't sure what. And I just saw that whitish ghost fly in front of me.
Yeah, it's a pretty unique experience. It's
Yeah.
honestly one of the things I just won't really forget. But yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, there's such great bats. Yeah. But it's great that you were able to work with land managers and things to sort of do this as responsibly as possible. Yeah.
That's sort of the direction I've been going in the last few years. One, it sort of bypasses a lot of the licensing, which is great. Yeah. But also it means I've got like an expert on hand to tell me where I'm going right and wrong, and just push it in the right direction. And like, it sounds weird, but having those restrictions in place just makes the whole thing a bit funner, because you got to actually think about what you're doing. And yeah, you can just get a bit more creative. And yeah, there's often a bit more of a story as well.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, thank you. I think we'll move on with the show.
No worries.
Yeah, you got a lot of praise in the comments of the live stream. It is beautiful photography. Thank you for sharing. Loving the patience and use of technology to bring those shots and insights. Oh, there is one question. How do you make sure the bats are in focus?
Say it again, sorry.
How do you make sure that the bats are in focus?
Oh, sorry. Okay, so you sort of take you pick a spot where you think a bat's going to come through, and you just focus on that. So you use your autofocus to like focus on a particular space, basically. And that's where you put your motion sensor, and then you just put it onto manual focus so the lens doesn't change it during the night. And basically, you just put the motion sensor exactly where that focus area is, and then when that animal goes through it, it is in focus in that plane. So yeah, it's like that's the hard part, because sometimes, like, even though you use a high speed motion sensor, it's not going to line up. It's not going to be instantaneous like you think it is. There's going to be like a few microseconds where it's all communicating together. But yeah, so there's a bit of guesstimation there, but it works in the end. It's just a bit of playing around.
Hello, my name's Nils Bouillard. I'm the Senior Trauma Carer for Bat Conservation Rescue Queensland in Australia. I run the Batzilla the Bat Facebook page and also the YouTube channel. And I rescue, raise, rehabilitate and release flying foxes back to the wild. Leilani. This is Miss Leilani, and she's a little red flying fox. You don't normally get little red flying foxes at this time of the year because generally speaking they winter and give birth in far north Queensland. We're just sitting on the cusp of our normal season, which is for black and grey-headed flying foxes. But the little reds got into some trouble in central Queensland and they were airlifted down. So we'll just finish weaning these, and next round of orphans will come in, which will start in probably early to mid-October. And they'll be black and grey-headed flying foxes. So if we get our orphans from newborn, they're generally weaned by the time they're 11 weeks old. So we start with a newborn 5 feeds a day, evenly spaced throughout the day. We do feed a specialist flying fox formula to them. And then by the time we get to 4 or 5 weeks, we're coming down to 4 feeds a day. And by the time we're at 11 weeks, we're just about weaned and eating fruit. So we introduce small pieces of very ripe pear or steamed apple, and that's called bat lolly. And they're usually introduced about 7 weeks, and they're very readily accepted. And that is the beginning of the weaning process. So BCRQ can get anything between, 100 to 250 orphans in a year. So those animals then have to be taken back to the wild. So the way that we do that is that we use weights and measures. So we measure a forearm, and that gives us an indication of age. So we put all bats of a similar forearm together. They go off to what's called a creche. A creche is a cage that's maintained near an existing flying fox camp with those species in them. And those animals are then released back to the wild. They're support fed until they're fully integrated into the local colony. So from birth to eventual release, you're looking at about 5 months. And we try and tie that in with natural behaviour of flying foxes in the wild. So we do know that most babies are weaned about February, March, which is when mating season starts again. And that pretty much mimics what happens in the wild. So our babies are out and flying free by that point in time, that February, March period. So Miss Leilani is still on 4 feeds a day. And little reds are about half the size of blacks and grey-headed flying foxes. And they live a more nomadic existence, and they're also more reliant on flowering, so they'll follow the major flowerings across Australia. So they're predominantly nectar and pollen feeders in the wild, whereas the blacks and greys will do pollen, nectar, bark, leaves, commercial and native fruits. So at the moment we've got 4 little red babies in care, so I'm feeding about 4 hours a day. And one's on the cusp of being weaned, which is nice, and she's just starting to fly. So usually between 9 to 11 weeks she'll start flying, and they're moved into a flight aviary at that point so they can learn to socialise with others of their species and also practice for the day when they are eventually released back to the wild. All 4 species of flying foxes are in rapid decline. The little reds are probably the most abundant. The grey-headed flying foxes are federally listed as vulnerable to extinction, and spectacled flying foxes have now become endangered. They're listed as endangered in Queensland. So a lot of this gets down to habitat destruction. People like to live where traditionally bat colonies have made their homes, and it's all impacting on flying fox populations. But we might go for a bit of a tour around my bat room. So everything happens in this room, so we can take bats from intake to assessment to treatment to rehabilitation, and once that process is finished they go out into the flight aviary. So we have a fine assortment of needles, syringes, fluids, everything that we may need to achieve that. This is a playpen. This is where the babies go into when they're old enough to hang, but they're not old enough to go outside. We have a table that we can do treatments on our bats and also assess on the table. We have humidity cribs or incubators. So what they do is they're a temperature controlled unit. We can dial up the temperature that we want, that our patient needs, and maintain that temperature, which is really important. So when they come in, core body temperatures are taken because it's a vital piece of equipment for us. If somebody has a low core body temperature, we know that they're in shock. A small number of our members are vet trained to administer IV fluids, as well as subcut fluids. So when somebody comes in shock, we can address shock, and we can reverse it with the use of heat, e.g. the humidity cribs and also the fluids. So we can also now provide oxygen to our patients, which has helped enormously. So we've got, some of us have oxygen concentrators which feed into the humidity cribs. So the first thing a human does when it gets to the hospital is it's put on oxygen. It's the first thing. The second thing we do with our bats when they come in, they get put onto oxygen. All bats are putting on oxygen now, and it's made a huge difference to our success rates as well. We can administer IV fluids to animals that are really flat and unable to take oral fluids. Most of the bats that come into this room stay in here from anything from a day or two to up to a couple of weeks, depending on how serious their injuries are or how unwell they are. Mostly they bounce back, but the ones that don't have to be intensively cared for. So it's a full-time job when we've got full bank of humidity cribs with animals in it, and they all require individual attention. They all need cleaning when they're in these incubators. They can't clean themselves. So there's a lot of washing, a lot of bed changing, a lot of bottom cleaning, wing washing, and that sort of stuff goes on. We have little incubators that we can put little people in, that like this one. So this one's hooked up to oxygen, so I literally can go into here. And if we choose, we can give that one oxygen as well. So full range of syringes and stuff, so I can just grab as soon as I need it. I've got a little station for fluids, so most animals that come in will require the subcutaneous fluids or IV fluids. Flying foxes don't seem to be built to maintain fluid levels very well, and they do suffer from dehydration quite quickly, so we need to get on top of that, and that's part of the treatment for shock. Depending on the severity of the injuries or the state of the animal that comes into care, once they've done their time in here and they're able to self-feed, they're able to hang, they're able to clean themselves effectively, and they're feeling much better, that is when they go out to the flight aviary to continue on with their rehabilitation with our other bats in care. Okay, so we're going for a bit of a visit to the flight aviary now. So my flight aviary is a 6 by 9 metre aviary, which gives them sufficient room to fly laps in, which is really good. And only vaccinated people are allowed in here for the safety of the animals. So this is where a lot of them do their time, and we have 3 species represented here. We have black flying foxes, grey-headed flying foxes, and little red flying foxes. So the main reasons that they come in are barbed wire entrapment, large aperture netting entrapment. They get attacked by dogs and cats and wild predators. They get hit by cars. They can get electrocuted on overhead power lines, but though anything that survives that is euthanized, it doesn't come into care, simply because of the internal burns. We've found that flying foxes are starting to suffer a lot more attrition through significant heat events that are happening, as well as regional starvation events. So there's lots of reasons that they come into care. Their world is shrinking, their habitat is disappearing, and they're coming into more and more conflict with humans, which is never good. So the idea of the ropes in the cage is to keep them fit to keep their muscles in tip-top condition, so that even if people can't fly, they can still exercise and flap on the ropes, which is really important for them. The same with the noodles. They're pool noodles that are covered in shade cloth, so animals can run up and down the noodles. They can fly from noodle to noodle if they need to do that. It's imperative that flying foxes have sun, as much sun as possible, because in the wild they roost at the tops of trees. And in care we must replicate as closely as possible that sort of scenario. So unfortunate here in the southern hemisphere, and our cage faces north, so they get sun all day. If they do want to get out of the sun, it gets too hot for them. We do provide toys for them, which sounds a bit silly, but they actually do like fuzzy toys, and they like to play around on them and whack them with their thumbs and all sorts of things and climb up and down them. So we try and put a great deal of thought into enrichment with our animals in care as well. And we've only recently discovered how important browse is for them as well. So we do try whenever we can to not only get flowering browse, but to also provide just native browse, because what I've found is that they not only eat the leaves of the browse, they rip off the bark and chew that up. They go through and pick the bugs off and munch up the bugs. So although we think of flying foxes as being predominantly nectar, pollen and fruit feeders, clearly their diet encompasses a much greater range of native foods. In care, they're fed cubed fruit, so that can be anything: apples, pears, rock melons, watermelons, bananas, grapes. And that's coated in a high protein supplement. We also provide kebabs, so there's strings of apples cut in half and hung up on wires. So anything that we can do they get a staple diet which is provided in trays, but the other stuff is called enrichment. So that's to help them pass the time in care and to give them something to do. They also have the benefit of social interactions in a large flight aviary, which clearly is incredibly important to them. They are a colony animal. And we try and keep the species together, as many of one species, if we have to shuffle them between the rehabbers, so especially with the little reds. So the little reds always have company of other little reds, which is incredibly important to them. Part of the reason I like working with bats is their poor reputation with people. People don't understand them. They see scary shapes in the sky and they think they're frightening, but the reality is that they're incredibly intelligent, sentient beings who are important to Australia's environment, critical to Australia's environment. They're incredible animals to deal with, to rehab, to raise. The babies are incredibly affectionate and they bond to us. And the rehab bats, they understand what we're doing for them. They cooperate with us, and the level of trust that they give us is priceless. And it's part of the reason I so enjoy doing rehab work. Once we put them outside and they become bats again, they're wild again, but the time that we have them inside, they're ours, and you can't put a price on that. So that really is a lot of the reason why I like working with bats. I do believe our work as advocates is terribly important as well. We are the only people who speak for them pretty much. Government policy has let flying fox populations down very badly, and if it weren't for volunteers who go out of the way to do not only this work but to attend community events to educate members of the community and the public how important flying foxes and bats are, if that didn't happen with volunteers, it wouldn't get out there at all. So the advocacy work that volunteers provide to the community is very valuable.
Okay, so that was a really great video of a really great bat carer. So obviously, yeah, the work all bat carers around the world do is very important, and we'll be hearing about a few of them actually throughout the day. So I just would like to say that while this event is not meant to be a fundraising event, I encourage anyone and everyone to show anyone who presents today some love on social media, and maybe if you can afford it, you can support them either financially or even a tiny bit. Every little bit helps. Or if you are if you have one nearby, you can offer to help them in person. There's loads of different ways to show love to any bat conservationist, either financially with time or just support them on social media. It's all very important, as Denise just said. So let's move on to, so this was in Australia, and let's just move across the Coral Sea, I think it's called, to New Caledonia. And we'll be hearing about more flying foxes, but they're slightly different ones.
La chasse a déjà fortement contribué à la disparition de 3 des 4 espèces de roussettes disparues à ce jour. En Nouvelle-Calédonie, si on ne fait rien, on estime que l'on pourrait perdre jusqu'à 80%.
I'm sorry, there should be subtitles. Let me just check whether the subtitles are coming later. Oh no, I'm not seeing any subtitles. Well, I'm sorry about that. If you don't understand French, I will pause a few times just to give a quick explanation, but you can mostly enjoy the images. But I'll try to explain what this video is about.
Dans les 30 prochaines années. Face à ce constat, la province Nord a mis en place un projet de gestion concertée des roussettes sur son territoire. Pourquoi? Parce que les roussettes font partie de notre identité, ce sont des animaux emblématiques, voire totémiques pour les Calédoniens. Les roussettes sont les jardiniers de nos forêts, elles réparent les dégradations de l'environnement que l'on cause. Enfin, les roussettes sont aussi un gibier apprécié de tous. Les protéger, c'est aussi nous préserver. Le projet Horizon Roussette.
So here he's just explained why it's important to protect any fruit bats. It's essentially because they are so invaluable to any habitat they use, because they're extremely good seed dispersers. They're pollinators as well. So they play a huge role in any kind of ecosystem they're part of. And so essentially protecting them is protecting people as well, because a lot of people rely on either fruit that are pollinated by, fruit species of which the flowers are pollinated by fruit bats or similar bats, or just because they help forest restoration and stuff like that as well. So it's really key to protect any kind of bat, but in this case, especially flying foxes.
Est un projet porté par la province Nord et cofinancé par l'Office français de la biodiversité. Il fait intervenir plusieurs acteurs, notamment le GIE Oceania, l'Institut agronomique néo-calédonien, l'Institut de recherche pour le développement et l'agence de communication Links, en plus de l'ensemble des communautés de la province Nord. La Nouvelle-Calédonie est un archipel français du Pacifique Sud, situé non loin de l'Australie, la Nouvelle-Zélande et le Vanuatu, avec une surface totalisant un petit peu plus de 18 000 km² et 270 000 habitants. La Nouvelle-Calédonie héberge 4 espèces de roussettes ou de chauves-souris frugivores, Pteropus ornatus, endémique à la Nouvelle-Calédonie, Pteropus tonganus, distribué dans plusieurs îles du Pacifique, Pteropus vetulus, endémique à la Nouvelle-Calédonie, et Notopteris neocalédonica, seconde espèce représentante de son genre, endémique à la Nouvelle-Calédonie. Parmi ces espèces, 2 sont principalement chassées, Pteropus ornatus et Pteropus tonganus. Ce sont des espèces sympatriques qui occupent les mêmes gîtes, qui consomment des fruits et du nectar, et qui ont des cycles biologiques très similaires, quasiment synchrones, et qui ne font qu'un petit par an, lorsque les conditions sont favorables. Une récente étude met en évidence une potentielle disparition de 33% des gîtes en seulement 40 ans, à dire d'acteurs en la province nord de la Nouvelle-Calédonie. La chasse aux roussettes en Nouvelle-Calédonie est réglementée par les codes de l'environnement provinciaux pour la province nord et la province sud et par une loi territoriale pour la province des îles Loyauté. Pour ce qui est de la province nord dans laquelle je travaille, la chasse est autorisée les week-ends du mois d'avril avec un quota de 5 roussettes par jour et par chasseur au maximum. Sont interdits la chasse au nid, le commerce de tout ou partie de roussettes, ainsi que le transport en dehors de la période de chasse autorisée. Seule la chasse aux Pteropus ornatus et Pteropus tonganus sont autorisées. Et en dehors de la période de chasse, l'ensemble des espèces de roussettes sont classées comme espèces protégées par le Code de l'environnement. Les motivations de chasse en Nouvelle-Calédonie sont très diversifiées. Premièrement, la consommation, que ce soit une consommation de subsistance ou encore une consommation cérémonielle, notamment pour la fête de la nouvelle igname, où les roussettes vont accompagner la consommation de l'igname nouvelle. Encore à l'heure actuelle, les os et les poils de roussette sont utilisés pour la confection de monnaies traditionnelles et par le passé, ils étaient aussi utilisés pour la confection d'objets sacrés comme des haches ostensoirs pour certains rituels. Les roussettes sont aussi chassées de manière récréative car c'est une chasse qui est ancrée dans la tradition des chasseurs néo-calédoniens. Et, bien que cela soit illégal, elles sont aussi vendues, cuites ou fraîches par plusieurs personnes sur l'ensemble du territoire. Pour faire un point sur la situation, nous faisons actuellement face, d'un côté, à un déclin des populations de roussettes, notamment dû à la chasse, et d'un autre côté, à une difficulté des provinces à faire respecter leur réglementation. C'est pourquoi, à travers le projet Horizon Roussette, la province Nord vise à préserver les populations de roussettes en respectant et en intégrant les usages et les pratiques culturelles des Néo-Calédoniens. Ainsi, l'objectif est de co-construire un nouveau management, une nouvelle gestion de ces espèces, mais aussi de sensibiliser la population à l'ensemble des enjeux liés aux roussettes, qu'ils soient écologiques, culturels ou sociaux. Afin de co-construire la gestion nouvelle des roussettes, nous avons mis en place un processus de concertation innovant. Dans le cadre de ce processus, les scientifiques, les gestionnaires et les associations fourniront un socle de connaissances à un groupe de concertation composé de l'ensemble des parties prenantes. Ces connaissances porteront sur les valeurs culturelles et sociales des roussettes, leur rôle écologique, l'état de leur population, leur biologie, leur écologie, et aussi sur les manières et les différents outils que nous avons pour les gérer à l'heure actuelle. Le groupe de concertation composé de l'ensemble des parties prenantes, lui, devra émettre des propositions pertinentes de gestion nouvelles qui seront ensuite présentées lors d'un forum à l'ensemble de la population, ce qui permettra, suite à ces échanges, de compiler des recommandations pour ce qui est des gestionnaires qui devront les formuler à l'intention des décisionnaires et, une fois les choix pris, il s'agira de sensibiliser la population à ces différentes stratégies, ces différentes actions de gestion qui auront été identifiées, élaborées lors de ce processus et choisies comme les plus intéressantes pour la suite. Dans le cadre de ce travail, nous avons choisi de partir sur un principe de gestion inclusive visant à intégrer au mieux l'ensemble des outils et leviers disponibles pour créer et co-construire une gestion nouvelle des populations de roussettes. Ainsi, on prévoit de réviser la gestion administrative, notamment la réglementation si besoin, mais aussi d'encourager les processus individuels et collectifs de gestion des roussettes mis en place par les habitants de la province Nord, notamment les réserves coutumières, les tabous et autres règles coutumières, mais aussi les actions menées par des citoyens eux-mêmes sur la protection des nids en terre privée ou encore des actions de revégétalisation. Ainsi, on espère mettre en place une gestion nouvelle qui sera acceptée et respectée. Nous menons également actuellement un inventaire des différents modes de gestion de la chasse aux chauves-souris dans le Pacifique. L'objectif de ce travail est de produire une évaluation régionale de la gestion de cette menace, mais aussi de fournir aux différents États du Pacifique des outils et différents modes de gestion de leurs voisins qu'ils puissent utiliser pour la gestion de cette menace. Si vous voulez contribuer, n'hésitez pas à me solliciter sur les réseaux ou par mail. Merci pour votre attention.
So we got some great insights into flying fox protection in New Caledonia that, as you saw, was happening on various levels. So they're working with the authorities, they're working with private landowners, they're working with hunters as well. So it's a very integrated approach to bat conservation, which is very interesting to see working in New Caledonia. Yeah.